Something feels off, doesn't it? You wake up, check your phone, go through the day, but deep down something feels wrong. It's not just stress. It's not just fatigue. It's a kind of emptiness that shouldn't be there. Everyone's in a rush trying to stay afloat, but no one really knows why. Maybe the real sickness isn't inside you. Maybe it's in what we now call normal. And in a world this disoriented, staying sane feels like being alone. But that loneliness could be the first step toward truth. It usually starts in silence, not some big moment, not a breakdown, just a quiet sense that something isn't right. You're going through your day, doing what you always do, but something in you starts to feel disconnected. Not from people, from the script, that invisible pressure to keep up, stay busy, smile on cue. It doesn't hit all at once. It builds until you can't ignore it anymore. You look around and everything seems fine. People laughing, working, posting, planning. But you feel it, that silent disconnect, like you're watching a play you no longer believe in. And then the question hits, is it me? Or is this entire system losing its mind? That question is where it begins. Not a breakdown, but a kind of awakening. Because what if sanity today doesn't feel peaceful? Because it isn't allowed. What if mental clarity has become a form of quiet exile? You start noticing things others ignore. The way people drown in distractions. How conversation became performance. How exhaustion is worn like a badge of honor. You begin to see how society teaches you to survive, not to live. To produce, to compare, to optimize. But never to stop and ask, why? And when you do ask, you feel the tension. Because once you become emotionally awake, you can't go back to sleep. You can't pretend that working yourself into anxiety is strength. You can't pretend that being constantly online is connection. You can't pretend that fitting in means you're okay. The world tells you to keep going, but something inside whispers, this isn't it. That whisper, that resistance, is a sign of health. It means your mind is still yours, that some part of you hasn't given in to the collective numbness. Because here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. We're in the middle of a mass psychosis. Not the kind that fills hospitals. The kind that fills timelines. That shows up in the way we define success, love, truth. It's a culture of endless stimulation and shallow certainty, where discomfort is medicated, silence is avoided, and truth is whatever gets the most likes. Even joy is manufactured now. You're told when to celebrate, what to share, what matters. And if you don't follow along, you feel like the strange one. To stay sane in this kind of world is not about having all the answers. It's about refusing to lie to yourself. And yes, it's lonely, because clarity doesn't bring applause, it brings distance. But maybe that distance is where you'll finally hear yourself again. Beneath the noise, beneath the roles, beneath the pressure to keep up. This isn't about blaming the world. It's about seeing it clearly, so you can stop pretending and start remembering who you are. There's a kind of loneliness that's hard to explain. You're surrounded by people, conversations, activity, yet something inside you feels detached. Not because you're broken, but because something in you stopped pretending. You begin to notice what others ignore, the way people repeat the same opinions, the way everyone talks around the truth but never into it, the constant effort to look fine, even when it's obvious something's not. And once you see it, you can't go back. You realize that most of what we call normal is just a strategy to avoid discomfort. Discomfort with the self, with silence, with uncertainty. And as your awareness grows, so does the distance. You stop laughing at things you used to. You drift from certain friendships. You avoid conversations that feel scripted. You feel out of sync with the world around you, like you're walking through a dream you no longer believe in. This isn't a phase. It's not moodiness. It's the emotional cost of waking up in a culture that fears depth. Because when you feel too much in a world that numbs itself, you start to look out of place. You won't be celebrated for your clarity. You'll often be misunderstood or ignored. And the hardest part is this. You'll start to question yourself. You'll wonder if you're too sensitive, too serious, too different. You'll miss how easy things used to feel, back when you didn't think so much. But that old ease came from not knowing. Now you know, and there's no way to unknow it. Carl Jung once said that becoming yourself is the privilege of a lifetime. What he didn't say but implied is that it can also feel like a kind of exile. Because when you stop performing, some people will drift away. They weren't connecting with you. They were connecting with the version of you that kept the peace. The version that smiled on cue, that said the right things, that stayed small to feel safe. Losing that version of yourself is painful, but it's also the beginning of something honest. This kind of awakening isn't loud. It doesn't look heroic. It often looks like pulling away, going quiet, rethinking everything you once believed. You might feel like you're falling apart, when in truth, you're finally falling into alignment. No, it's not easy, but it's real. And real is what the world needs more of. Even if no one claps for it. Even if it makes you the quiet one in the room. That silence? It means your soul is back in the conversation. Silence used to be part of life, but now it feels like a threat. We fill every gap, every pause, every still moment with something. Music, podcasts, notifications, voices that aren't our own. It's not just about boredom, it's about fear. Because in the silence, something starts to rise. A discomfort, a question, a truth we've been trying to avoid. And so we scroll, we consume, we stay busy. Not because we're curious, but because we're scared of what might surface when the noise stops. Aldous Huxley once imagined a world not ruled by fear, but by pleasure. A society that doesn't silence dissent through violence, but through entertainment. He was right. The tools of control today aren't cages. They're screens. Eric Fromm called this the escape from freedom, a condition where we're so overwhelmed by choice, so detached from meaning, that we seek refuge in distraction. Not because it's fulfilling, but because it's familiar. We don't want to feel lost, so we stay busy. But distraction isn't neutral. It shapes us. Bit by bit, it rewires our minds. Sherry Tickle, a psychologist at MIT, found that our constant connection has made us more anxious and less present. We're talking more, but saying less. Connected to everyone, but disconnected from ourselves. We check our phones hundreds of times a day. Not to learn, but to avoid something deeper, a kind of emotional hunger, one that can't be fed with likes or updates. Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of Auschwitz, wrote that humans can endure almost anything, except a life without meaning. And that's what many of us are running from. Not pain, but the emptiness left when life becomes nothing but tasks, content, and goals without soul. Distraction is a sedative. It numbs us gently, keeps us from noticing that we're slowly losing touch with what makes us human. Stillness, reflection, awe. Even joy becomes a performance. Even sadness is curated. In this kind of culture, staying present feels unnatural, because presence brings awareness, and awareness brings grief. Grief for the time we've wasted, for the connections we've faked, for the self we've abandoned in exchange for applause. But silence isn't your enemy. It's where your real voice lives. It's the space where healing begins. We weren't meant to be on all the time. We weren't meant to consume more than we create, react more than we reflect. Stepping away from the noise isn't withdrawal, it's recovery. And if being alone with your thoughts scares you, probably means those thoughts are worth listening to. You look around and think, everyone else seems to be doing fine. They have jobs, routines, weekend plans. They talk about TV shows, office drama, the latest trend. They laugh when they're supposed to and worry about what's expected. So you try to do the same. You mirror the rhythm. You learn the script. But deep down, you feel the pressure of pretending. You're not free, you're performing. And the performance is exhausting. Because what we call normal today often means hiding. Hiding doubt, hiding fear, hiding the parts of you that don't fit the story. And the more you perform, the more distant you feel from yourself. Michel Foucault wrote that every society defines its own version of sanity, not to protect the individual, but to preserve order. What's rewarded isn't truth, but conformity. You're not asked to be real, just to be stable. So we adapt. We learn to smile while we're breaking, to talk about the weather when we're craving depth, to be functional even if it costs us our inner life. But adaptation isn't always healing. Sometimes it's survival. Carl Jung warned that the greatest danger is not the monsters outside us, but the unconscious roles we play without question. He called it the persona, the mask we wear to survive, and the more we wear it, the more we forget it's a mask. You tell yourself, "I'm okay," but it's not okay to constantly question your worth. It's not okay to fear silence, to fear rest, to fear simply being. We live in a world where even freedom became a performance. You can be whoever you want as long as it looks good online. You can speak your truth as long as it's marketable. You can be different as long as it doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. This isn't freedom. It's aesthetic conformity. Nietzsche once said, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." And today, that struggle is digital, cultural, psychological. Matthias Desmet describes this as mass formation, a psychological state where individuals surrender their inner compass to belong. They stop thinking independently, not out of weakness, but out of a deep human need to feel safe. And this is the paradox. We call it freedom, but it's fear dressed in self-expression. You don't want to be abandoned, so you become what's accepted. You shrink, you filter, you agree. Not because it's true, but because it's safer. But real freedom isn't about being accepted. It's about being aligned with who you are when no one's watching. And that kind of freedom doesn't perform. It disturbs, questions. It lives without asking permission. Mass delusion doesn't arrive with a warning. It speaks in the language of safety, progress, morality. It tells you that questioning is dangerous. That doubt is betrayal. That discomfort means you're the problem. And little by little, people start to obey, not out of fear, but out of belonging. Gustave, one of the first to study crowd psychology, wrote that when individuals dissolve into a crowd, their critical thinking shuts down. They crave illusion more than truth because illusion offers certainty, and certainty feels safer than complexity. That's where mass delusion begins. Not with lies, but with stories that feel good. With simplified answers to painful questions. With rituals of speech that signal virtue without requiring thought. You hear the same slogans repeated everywhere, not because they're deeply understood, but because they protect you from being excluded. Carl Jung warned that the more rational a society believes it is, the more vulnerable it becomes to unconscious forces. A society that cuts itself off from mystery, from myth, from inner reflection, doesn't become stronger, it becomes hollow. And in that emptiness, the collective mind becomes a sponge for fear. Once fear takes hold, truth becomes negotiable, and identity becomes tied to group allegiance. George Orwell showed us what control looks like through violence, a boot stamping on a human face. But Aldous Huxley foresaw something more familiar, a population that's too distracted, too entertained, too pacified to care. In Brave New World, people don't resist because they're comfortable. They're numbed by pleasure, flooded with content, addicted to comfort. Sound familiar? Michel Foucault pushed this further. The true power of a society lies not in punishment, but in what it silently defines as normal. Once norms are internalized, control no longer needs chains. It lives inside you. You police your own thoughts. You censor yourself before anyone else can. Today, the crowd doesn't gather in the town square. It lives in timelines. It judges through likes, exiles through silence. You don't need a prison to feel trapped. You just need the constant fear of saying the wrong thing. Matthias Desmet calls this mass formation. It happens when people become isolated, anxious, and directionless, and are then offered a single, unifying narrative. Not one based on evidence, but on emotional cohesion. The logic doesn't matter. What matters is belonging. In this state, people stop thinking. Not because they're unintelligent, but because thinking becomes too costly. You might sense the illusion, see the contradictions. You might feel like you're the only one asking, "Wait, does this make any sense?" But you'll often stay silent, because breaking the spell means risking exile. And that's the brilliance and the cruelty of mass delusion. Keeps people aligned through emotion, not reason. through comfort, not coercion. Lucidity becomes a burden. You're not praised for seeing clearly, you're punished for stepping out of line. But here's the deeper truth. Mass psychosis isn't about madness, it's about forgetting. Forgetting how to be alone with your thoughts. Forgetting how to trust your own eyes. Forgetting how to live without needing constant approval. To stay awake in a world this hypnotized isn't easy, but it's the only way to stay human. You can check every box society gives you, the career, the place to live, the relationship, and the compliments, and still feel something quietly out of place. That feeling isn't a flaw in you. It's a reflection of how disconnected life has become from anything real. When the things around you stop making sense, it's not because you're broken. It's because something inside you is still working, still paying attention. You move through your day, but nothing feels grounded. You smile, talk, function, but a part of you stays absent. We were taught to chase goals, not to ask if they mean anything. To build resumes, not inner lives. To be productive, not whole. Viktor Frankl once said that meaning is as essential to the soul as food is to the body. He witnessed how people, stripped of everything, still held on, if they had something to live for. When that's gone, even luxury feels hollow. This is the quiet epidemic no one talks about. People achieving everything they were told would make them happy, and still feeling lost. We're drowning in information and starving for wisdom. Endless options. No direction. Carl Jung warned that when life loses its spiritual dimension, people fill the void with noise, consumption, and control. He called it a spiritual crisis, not in a religious sense, but in a human one. A loss of connection to something deeper, something that anchors you when the world turns upside down. When you ignore that hunger, it doesn't disappear. It just shows up in different ways. Anxiety, numbness, burnout that won't go away no matter how many vacations you take. To stay sane today, you have to do something radical. You have to build meaning with your own hands. You have to choose it, not borrow it. That might mean turning away from things that once made you feel important. It might mean sitting in silence long enough to hear yourself think. It might mean embracing values that don't make sense to anyone else but keep you whole. Jiddu Krishnamurti said, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." So if you've started to question things, if you've pulled away from the noise, you're not malfunctioning. You're responding to something real. Meaning doesn't have to be dramatic. It can live in small rituals. Taking care of something, creating something, being fully present with someone, touching something real with no audience. These are not luxuries. They're foundations. And without them, your mind drifts. It grabs onto whatever looks like purpose, even if it leaves you empty. Aldous Huxley warned that when comfort becomes the goal, wonder disappears. And without wonder, life flattens. It becomes something you manage, not something you feel. You need space to feel again, to be moved, to remember that life isn't something you scroll through. It's something you live from the inside out. The world won't give that to you. You have to protect it. You have to build it. You have to return to it, even if no one else understands why. That's the path back to sanity. And it begins the moment you stop running from what matters. Seeing clearly doesn't make you better. It makes you lonelier. Because once you stop performing, once you stop pretending to believe in the script, the crowd keeps moving, but you stay still. And that stillness is heavy. You watch conversations pass like rehearsed theater. You see people argue not to understand, but to prove they belong. You notice how truth is filtered, softened, made digestible until it means nothing at all. And you carry this invisible weight, the weight of clarity in a world built on denial. Jung once said that people don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that work, that slow inner work, isn't something you can share in a tweet or decorate on a profile. It's silent, it's uncomfortable, and it separates you from the world you once fit into. But that separation is not failure. It's alignment. Jiddu Krishnamurti reminded us, "It is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." So maybe the discomfort isn't a problem to fix. Maybe it's proof you're still awake, still thinking, still human. Nietzsche warned, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that he does not become a monster. And that's part of this journey too, because clarity without compassion becomes bitterness. Truth without humility becomes pride. So if you felt the urge to withdraw, to go quiet, to step away, maybe it wasn't weakness. Maybe it was your soul saying, you need to return to something real. You don't have to shout to resist. You don't have to argue to prove your depth. Sometimes, staying sane is about small choices. What you give your attention to, what you refuse to normalize, what you choose to build even in private. And no, you won't always be understood. People may mock the discomfort you feel. They may call you too sensitive, too serious, too disconnected. But that's the price of presence. Thomas Merton once wrote, "The rush and pressure of modern life are a form, perhaps the most common form, of its innate violence." So stepping away, even just mentally, is a form of resistance. And if you're still here, still listening, it means you feel it too. That quiet ache, that deep dissonance, that pull towards something more honest. You're not alone in this. There's a small but growing circle of people choosing clarity over convenience, meaning over noise, depth over performance. Maybe you're one of them. What we explored here is just one thread in the fabric of that awareness. But if it spoke to something in you, even a whisper, that's enough. If you feel the need to say something, do it. In the comments, in your journal, in your next conversation. If you want to hear more, stay close. This isn't a trend, it's a return to something we were never supposed to forget.